The sky over the city was quiet. No sirens, no protests, just silence. A silence that comes after the truth explodes. Elijah Walker stood in front of the Capitol building, wearing the same black suit he wore in court. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He had spent weeks traveling from city to city, telling his story, showing proof. And now, the world was watching. This was not just about him anymore. The speech that shook the nation. A large crowd stood in front of Elijah. Thousands of people, young and old, black and white, rich and poor. Some held flags, some held signs, but everyone held their breath. Elijah stepped to the mic. He looked up, and then, with a deep breath, he spoke. They put chains on me in court, but I wore chains long before that. Not on my hands, but on my truth, on my past. I was told to keep quiet, to hide. But silence is a prison too. He looked at the cameras. They framed me, not just because I'm a soldier, not just because I'm black, but because they feared what I knew. They feared the day I would speak. People in the crowd wiped their eyes. Flashbacks, hidden sacrifice. While Elijah spoke, news channels showed clips. A young Elijah in army uniform, carrying a child through a war zone. A letter from a village elder calling him the angel who came at night. Documents showing missions that saved hundreds, but were buried deep to protect politics. Now, all exposed, the system begins to crack. As Elijah finished his speech, phones buzzed everywhere. Breaking any audios. 3 officers resign. DOJ opens federal case against corrupt judges. President requests meeting with Elijah Walker. The same system that tried to bury Elijah was now begging to talk. The crowd began to chant, Elijah, Elijah. He raised one hand, and the crowd went silent. Don't just chant my name, he said softly. Stand up for the voiceless. Speak up for those still trapped. Fight for those who can't fight back. A quiet moment. Later that evening, Elijah sat at a small park bench. Maya sat beside him. She held his hand. You changed everything, she said. He looked up at the sky. No, he replied. The truth did. A small boy walked up with his mother. Are you the hero from TV? He asked. Elijah smiled. I'm just someone who finally stopped being silent. The boy hugged him. And for the first time in a long time, Elijah's eyes filled with tears. The sun was just setting when Serena James turned the corner in her clean black SUV. She had just left her little sister's school after dropping off her science project. Serena looked calm, dressed in simple jeans and a dark hoodie. She didn't look rich. She didn't look important. But her eyes held something deeper, something sharp, something trained. She stopped at the red light, waiting quietly. The city was loud, busy. Cars passed, people walked, and sirens wailed in the distance. Then, flashing lights behind her, red and blue. She looked in her mirror, a police car. Serena calmly pulled over. 2 white officers stepped out, laughing as they approached her. License and registration. One of them barked. Serena rolled down her window slowly. Good evening, officer. Everything okay? He didn't answer. The second officer leaned closer and gave her a cold smile. Where'd you steal this ride, sweetheart? Serena blinked but didn't react. This is my car. Sure it is, the first cop said, smirking. Mine stepping out. Serena handed him her license and spoke quietly. Please scan it in your system. It will clear everything. The officer didn't even look. I said step out. She nodded once and stepped out slowly, her hands where they could see. People nearby had started to watch. A few pulled out their phones. One woman whispered, "She looks so calm." A man answered, "Doesn't matter. They already made up their mind." The second officer walked around her car, then whistled. "Who's this registered to?" Some rich boss you work for. Serena said nothing. Cat got your tongue, the first officer said. You people think being quiet means innocent. Serena looked him in the eye. Calm. Still. Please scan the ID. But they didn't. Instead, they handcuffed her. The crowd gasped. Why are you arresting her? A woman shouted. She didn't do anything, said another. But the officers laughed and pushed Serena toward the car. You're under arrest for suspicious behavior and possible vehicle theft, the first officer said loudly, almost performing for the crowd. Serena didn't resist. Not a word. Not a cry. Just silence. At the police station, she was brought inside. Her hoodie was slightly dirty now. Her wrists red from the cuffs. An officer at the desk looked up at her ID, then froze. He quickly stood and walked out without saying a word. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The two mocking officers leaned against the wall, still chuckling. Bet she's some maid who got lucky, one said. Or a girlfriend of some drug guy, the other replied. But then, the door opened, and in walked Captain Reed, one of the highest-ranking officers in the city. He looked serious, angry even. He held the ID in his hand. He turned to the officers. You arrested her. They straightened up. Yes, sir. Caught her driving a luxury car without any good reason. Captain Reed looked at Serena again, then back at them. Do you two know who this is? They shook their heads. He slammed the ID on the table. You arrested a federal officer with top security clearance. She outranks me. Dead silence. The officers turned pale. One of them whispered. She didn't say anything. Captain Reed looked at them coldly. She didn't need to. Serena, still calm, stood straight. For the first time, she spoke a full sentence. Her voice was clear, steady, strong. I gave you a chance. I told you to scan the ID. You chose to ignore it. The police station felt cold now. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence. The two officers who had mocked Serena stood frozen near the desk. The color in their faces had drained. Their hands shook slightly. Captain Reed walked slowly toward them, holding Serena's ID card like it was a weapon. She gave you this? He asked. Yes, sir, one officer said, his voice low. She told you to scan it? Yes. We just thought. You thought wrong, Captain Reed snapped. You didn't check. You didn't follow protocol. You saw a black woman in a nice car and decided she was a thief. The second officer tried to speak. She wasn't talking. She was acting strange, too calm. Captain Reed narrowed his eyes. That calmness, that's training. That's years of discipline. She's not just a federal officer. She's part of a unit even I don't have full access to. The officers looked at Serena again, this time with fear. She was still quiet, still calm, still standing with her hands behind her back. The cuffs were off now, but her silence remained strong. A few minutes later, the station doors swung open. A black SUV rolled up outside. Sleek, shiny. No police lights, but everyone knew this wasn't just a visitor. Two men stepped out. Suits, sunglasses, no smiles. They walked straight past the front desk. Captain Reed met them with a firm handshake. Agents, he said. The taller agent nodded. We were called about Commander Serena James. Where is she? The entire room went still again. The word commander echoed in the minds of the officers. Commander. The woman they had called a thief. The woman they had laughed at. She was a commander. The agents approached Serena. One of them nodded with deep respect. Ma'am, he said, we're here to take you home. The younger officer couldn't hold it anymore. Wait, this is a mistake, right? She didn't look like someone important. Serena finally turned to face him. Her voice was soft but firm. Because I wore a hoodie. Because I stayed calm. You thought that meant I was nothing. The officer swallowed hard. We didn't mean. "You meant exactly what you did," she said. The agents stepped forward. One of them placed a thick red file on the desk. Stamped on the front were 2 words: "Classified. Level 5. Captain Reed opened it and glanced inside. His eyes widened. He didn't speak. Inside that file were photos. Photos of Serena James in full tactical gear, jumping from helicopters, leading soldiers in war zones, protecting diplomats overseas. One photo showed her dragging a wounded soldier through gunfire. Another showed her standing beside the U.S. flag, receiving a medal. The mocking officers slowly sat down, like their legs couldn't hold them anymore. They had arrested a woman who had saved lives all over the world. A hero. And they had treated her like a criminal. In the back corner, an old officer who had been quiet all along finally spoke. "I've seen her before," he said. "Years ago. She was on a mission that saved a foreign president. That was top secret." The younger officer whispered, "Why didn't she tell us?" Captain Reed turned to him, almost in disbelief. "She did," he said. "She told you to scan the ID. That was her telling you." Outside, reporters had started gathering. Somehow, word had already leaked. Phones rang. Questions were asked. But inside the station, Serena was silent. She didn't care about cameras. She didn't care about headlines. She only cared about the truth. The lead agent spoke again. "We'll take her from here." Serena nodded once. As she walked past the officers, she stopped beside them for just a moment. She looked into their eyes. "I don't want your apology," she said. "I want change. Not for me. For every girl who looks like me and gets judged before she's heard." Then she walked out with the agents, and the whole room watched in silence. Inside the police station, the atmosphere grew tense after the arrival of the federal agents. The red file, marked classified, level 5, sat on the desk for all to see. Its presence silenced every mocking laugh and every whispered comment that had filled the room moments before. The file contained pages that would change everything about how the officers saw Serena James. Captain Reed slowly opened the file. Inside were several photos and documents, each telling a story that spanned years and continents. One photo showed a young Serena, dressed in full tactical gear, riding on the back of a military helicopter. Another picture captured her in a crowded, dusty village, where she was seen comforting frightened children, while chaos unfolded around her. There was also an image of her helping a wounded soldier on a battlefield, her face determined even as smoke and danger filled the background. The officers, who minutes before had sneered at her calm and quiet demeanor, now sat in stunned silence. One of them, who had earlier joked about her being just a maid or a girlfriend of a drug guy, now trembled, realizing that they had handled a person far more important than they ever imagined. Their eyes darted from the file to Serena, and then back to the file, as if trying to erase the truth from their minds. In the background, a young officer who had remained silent spoke softly. "I remember a story from years back. They said Commander Serena James once led her team in a mission that saved a foreign president. It was a top-secret mission. I never thought I'd see proof of it." His voice wavered with a mix of awe and regret. The other officers exchanged uneasy looks, understanding that they had not only mistreated a federal officer, but one with a proven record of saving lives. Serena stood quietly by the desk, watching each reaction without a word. Her calmness was like ice, slowly melting away the pride of the once confident cops. The federal agents remained professional, their eyes never leaving the file. One of the agents picked up a document and held it up so everyone could see. It was an official letter, signed by a high-ranking member of the Department of Defense. The letter confirmed that Serena James had been a key part of an elite team on international missions. The document read, "For her brave actions in the field and her leadership during dangerous operations, Commander Serena James is hereby recognized for her service and is to be accorded all respect and security clearance as mandated by federal law." A heavy silence fell over the room. The mocking officers, who had once stood so boldly, now shrank back as the weight of their actions settled in. It was clear that they had been fooled by appearances and had chosen to judge based on looks and stereotypes. Their earlier actions, driven by prejudice and misjudgment, now reverberated as a cautionary tale in the quiet of the station. Outside, the stir of news had started to build. Reports of the strange arrest were beginning to leak on social media. The small actions of these officers were spreading fast, and people were starting to ask questions about how someone like Serena James could be treated so harshly. But inside the station, the focus was on the evidence that lay before them. Captain Reed, still holding the file, finally cleared his throat. These documents prove that Serena James is not only cleared of the charges, but is a decorated federal officer with a secret past in international security, he said in a firm, steady tone. His eyes met the younger officers, who now looked ashamed and uncomfortable. You were given clear instructions to scan her ID. You ignored your duty, and by doing so, interfered with federal security. Before anyone could speak, Serena stepped forward. It was as if the room awaited her next words with bated breath. Her eyes were soft yet unyielding as she addressed everyone present. I did not ask for any mercy, she began in a quiet yet strong voice. I only asked you to do your job correctly. I told you to scan my ID because I knew you could verify the truth, but you chose to ignore it. There was a pause, and then one of the agents said, "This is why we are here. This is why we must protect those who serve our country, even if they do so in silence." His statement carried a weight that stirred the feelings in everyone. As the words sank in, one of the officers frantically reached for his dashcam remote. I need to delete the footage," he stammered. But before he could do so, Captain Reed snapped his fingers. "No, we have evidence of everything. The truth cannot be hidden with a few clicks." The sound of that single command echoed in the room. The officers knew that what they had done was wrong, and now the truth was spreading. Behind closed doors at the station, a new understanding was forming, a promise that such injustice would be exposed. Serena's calm gaze swept over the room once more. "I did not ask to be mocked," she said. "I asked for a fair process. I ask that you learn from this, so that one day no other officer, no matter how they look, has to endure what you made me suffer." The room remained silent as the gravity of her words settled. The federal agents began to organize, preparing to take over the handling of the case. The mocking officers were left to face the consequences of their actions, a consequence not just in disciplinary terms, but in the deep personal shame of knowing they had treated a hero as a criminal. As the file was closed and the scene began to clear, the news outside was rising. Social media buzzed with the story of Commander Serena James, and questions poured in about the proper treatment of those who serve under the flag of truth. The truth was no longer hidden. It was becoming clear for all to see. Serena had never wanted fame. She didn't want to be a symbol of anything. She didn't ask for any attention, but that didn't stop the world from noticing her. As soon as the news of her arrest began to spread, the world took notice. Social media exploded with posts and hashtags. People shared the story of the calm, quiet woman who had been treated like a criminal simply because of her skin color. The hashtag Serena James Truth began trending, quickly becoming a symbol for injustice, prejudice, and the power of truth. Serena, however, wasn't paying attention to the media. She didn't care about the tweets, the Instagram posts, or the headlines. All she wanted was to go back to her quiet life. But her life was no longer quiet. It had been turned upside down by the ignorance of a few officers and the relentless thirst for justice that she felt in her soul. The phone rang at her apartment. "Commander James," the voice on the other end said. "This is the White House. We need to talk." Serena's mind raced. The White House. She had always kept a low profile, avoiding any unnecessary attention from the public or the government. But this was different. The voice on the phone wasn't just some journalist. This was someone high up, someone who had power. And when they called, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. The next day, Serena was escorted to a government building, the same one where top officials worked. Inside, the halls were lined with flags, and the air felt thick with power. It was strange for her, who had spent years in the field, leading missions in foreign lands. But now, in this building, her life felt like it was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. Serena was led into a conference room. The long table was filled with people she didn't recognize. Most of them were wearing suits. One man, older and with a stern face, stood up to greet her. He was the one who had called her. "Serena," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Agent Davis. Thank you for coming. We need you to understand how much your story is resonating with the world right now." Serena shook his hand, still feeling the weight of the situation. She had never wanted to be a part of something so public, but now, it seemed, she had no choice. Agent Davis sat down. "You're more than just a hero. You've become a symbol of something much bigger than yourself. People are tired of injustice. They're tired of being silenced because of who they are. Your story, what happened to you, it's causing waves of change." Serena looked around the room. There were reporters, military officials, even some lawyers. They were all staring at her as if waiting for her to say something. She felt the pressure building. For the first time, she realized how many eyes were on her, and how many lives could be impacted by what she said or did next. But Serena wasn't afraid. She had faced worse situations than this. She had fought in wars. She had led missions in foreign countries. She had been in life-or-death situations countless times. But here, in this room, there was something even more dangerous: expectations. "We understand you don't want fame," Agent Davis continued. "But the truth you represent is far more powerful than you could ever imagine. You're in a position now to make real change, not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of their race or appearance." Serena didn't respond right away. She looked down at the table, thinking carefully. She had spent her life working in the shadows, protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. She never wanted recognition. But now, it was as if the world had given her a platform, and she couldn't ignore it. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't do what I did for recognition. I did it because it was right. I don't need to be a symbol. But if my story can help others who are suffering in silence, then I will speak. I will do whatever it takes." The room was silent. The weight of her words hung in the air. Serena didn't want to be anyone's hero, but she knew she could help. She had the power to make a difference, even if it was just one life at a time. The next few days were a blur. Serena was invited to speak at rallies, on news channels, and even at local schools. Her story was everywhere. People who had once been afraid to speak out found courage in her words. The world seemed to be shifting in her favor, but Serena still remained the same person, quiet, reserved, and focused on her mission. But even as the praise poured in, there was something darker happening behind the scenes. The officers who had arrested Serena were now facing serious consequences. The department had launched an internal investigation, and some were talking about disciplinary actions. The younger officer, who had made the most mistakes, was visibly shaken. He knew he had made a grave error, but now, the consequences were far greater than he could have imagined. As for Serena, she didn't care about the fallout for them. What mattered to her was that the system was finally being held accountable for its mistakes. The voices of those who had been silenced for so long were finally being heard. The world had changed since that day at the police station. Serena James was no longer just a woman on a mission. She was now a symbol of what could happen when people stood up against injustice, no matter the cost. And though the media spotlight was still on her, Serena knew this was only the beginning. The fight for justice had just begun, and she was ready. "Everything I'd done, every decision I've made, was to protect this country. I've put my life on the line. I'd done things that the world will never know about. But now, it's time for the truth to come out, because I am done hiding." The judge looked at Serena, his face unreadable, but the weight of her words was clear in his eyes. "Your Honor, What happened in that police station was a misunderstanding. But what happened here today is not just about me. It's about everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race, their background, or their status. We can't keep pretending this isn't happening. We can't keep silencing people like me, who fight for the truth. The silence in the room was deafening. The tension was thick. The world was watching, and Serena knew it. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced far worse than this. She had faced battles that were far more dangerous, far more deadly. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the truth, and Serena was ready to face whatever came next. The judge, now fully aware of the magnitude of what Serena had just revealed, turned to the officers. Their eyes were wide with fear. They had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed. The courtroom was in chaos, but Serena remained calm. The truth had been exposed. The world would never look at her the same way again, and neither would the officers. Serena stood tall as the judge began to speak. His voice was low but resolute. This trial has taken a turn no one expected. But now we must move forward with the full knowledge of the facts. No one, not even those in power, is above the law. As the courtroom buzzed with activity, Serena quietly walked toward the exit. She had said her piece. She had revealed the truth. The rest of the world would have to deal with the consequences. But Serena knew something deeper now. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked. It was about the people who had been silenced, who had been ignored, who had been forgotten. And with that, Serena James walked out of the courtroom. The world was no longer the same, and neither was she.